My name is Grace McLean. I am with NACCHO, and I'd like to welcome you all to the July Model Aquatic Health Code Network webinar. This month's title is Keep Up with the Model Aquatic Health Code, with our featured presenter, Dr. Michael Beach from the CDC. First, we have a few logistics to go over. Please use your computer speakers to listen to today's presentation, and all your questions may be submitted via the chat box. We will have a Q&A session after our featured presentation, but you are welcome to submit questions as they come up throughout the duration of the webinar, and we'll answer them at the end. I also would like to encourage you all to join the MAHC network if you have not done so already. This is a great resource for implementation. You will receive all of our updates on the webinars and also have access to our archived webinars. There will be some additional networking opportunities we hope coming up in the fall and winter, so please stay tuned. We do not have any updates from CDC or the Council for the Model Aquatic Health Code today because the featured presentation consists of a lot of their updates. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our featured presenter. Dr. Michael Beach has been at CDC for over 29 years and currently serves as Associate Director for Healthy Water in CDC's National Center for Emerging and Zoonotic Infectious Diseases and the Deputy Director for the Division of Foodborne, Waterborne, and Environmental Diseases. Using lessons learned from his first water park-associated outbreak investigation in 1995 and subsequent investigations, he created CDC's Healthy Swimming Program in 2001, co-founded the Model Aquatic Health Code effort in 2007, and served on the MAHC Steering Committee until the release of the MAHC in 2014. He now serves as President of the Board of Directors on the Council for the Model Aquatic Health Code. So without further ado, Dr. Beach, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'm really pleased to be here today to talk to you about release of the 2018 Model Aquatic Health Code. And I'm getting a lot of feedback, Grace.
You sound good to me. Maybe our audience, could you let us know if the audio sounds okay? Sounds good coming out. So maybe make sure that your computer speakers are muted, Dr. Beach. And otherwise, you should be good to go. Are you there, Michael?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Uh-oh, I think the echo is starting again.
So it may be, if you are calling in through Skype, it could be because of that.
Okay.
So maybe turn the volume down low so that we can hear you speaking, but then you won't get the feedback from your computer speakers.
Okay. Can you hear me now, Grace?
Yeah, we hear you great.
Okay. I'm actually okay. So I think we're okay. If people, if you can hear me, just type in to say everything looks good. I think we're.
Yep. The audience is letting us know that it sounds good.
Okay. So. Again, thanks for everybody coming on. I see a lot of familiar names of folks. And so before I even start, let me thank all of you that have been involved in this process all the way through to coming out with the 2018 edition. I see many names that have really contributed to what I'm going to talk about today. So I think this is an exciting time as we come out with the 2018, oops, I'm going the wrong way. 2018 edition. I do want to just give, because it's unclear that everybody is up to the same speed, so I will go through pretty rapidly talking about some of the MAHC introduction and how we got here, because I think it's important that we all start from the same framework here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the MAHC, the CMAHC, and then what's changed, next steps, and so on. And again, you can type in questions as we go along here. just again, if we go back to the MAHC, it was a Council for State and Territorial Epidemiologists position statement in 2005. We formed steering committee and technical committees, started working towards the end of 2007, beginning of 2008. And our vision is really it's about healthy and safe aquatic experiences for everyone. And I think that's really critical, that whether we're public health or aquatics, that's really the bottom line for where we are coming from. And so how does that vision really translate out? Is that we're really, and think about from a CDC standpoint, we're infectious disease, we're injury, we're air quality, et cetera, et cetera. And so we cover the gamut from a public health standpoint. And so we want to see that public health, really supports public pools, water parks, spas in every community. We want them well operated, and they remain open upon inspection. We see data that says that's not always the case. Everyone knows how to swim. Everyone enjoys the health, social, and family benefits of aquatics because there's clear data behind this that says we want to make it healthier and safer, but we certainly want to get people to be part of this. Healthy and safe aquatic experiences for everyone, basically, is where we're coming from. Improving swimmer ability, knowledge, hygiene, improved pool operation. What we know is that is really going to lead to reduced drowning, reduced pool chemical related injuries, other injuries, limiting disease outbreaks that we've seen increasing over the past few decades. And really the MAHC and the Council for the Model Aquatic Healthcare can really achieve, I think, this long-range vision using incremental change to move aquatics towards the vision. I think as Doug Sackett appropriately says, evolution, not revolution. That's how we get people to implement. So what is the Model Aquatic Health Code? Many of you know that, but for those who don't know, it's based on science and best practices. It's split into two documents, basically a code and basically an annex that explains the data and rationale. As I've said to people before, as a child, I always wanted to be told when somebody told me not to do something or to do something. I like to know the rationale, and I think that's really important for people to be able to read up on that. Resources for creating or updating pool codes. That's, we don't want public health folks to be reinventing the wheel. We can use our national consortia to do that. Reducing outbreaks, drowning, and injuries, I said, and outlining uniform safety and operation standards is key. There's a good review and update cycle advised by the Council for the Model Aquatic Health Code. I'll go into a little bit more detail. And now we're at the point where we're going to be meeting every 3 years. We met in 2017 in October to vote on change requests. And we know that we've had strong endorsements from the National Environmental Health Association, NACCHO, which you're on their webinar now, and the Council for State and Territorial Epidemiologists. We were awarded the 2017 Kelly Ogle Safety Award from the World Water Park Association, and we have some other endorsements that will be coming out from aquatics groups in the next week or so that you'll hear about. But I think that's really important to understand, that we built this as a national consortia of public health and aquatics and academia, and that's how we continue to do this as the process moves forward, so that we see support from both sides of the contributors that are part of this consortia. Layout is, as one might expect, by sections, preface, user guide, glossary of acronyms, initialisms, and so on, and listings of all the codes that are referred to and that sort of thing. And then we're split into really 3 main sections: design standards and construction, which are primarily for new construction or substantial renovation, facility operation and maintenance, policies and management, and then some appendices. Annex language is really, as I said, that scientific rationale for the code language. We hear a lot from people that even if you haven't used the code itself to be adopted, people are using the annex to understand why we're doing certain things. Suggested best practices, it's going to be regularly updated. We're actually talking about updating it off cycle so that we do it more often, as we've created an annex update committee as part of the CMAHC. And when you go through the structure, you'll see by the code, the section numbers, that there's an A where there's wording in the annex to explain what the thinking was behind this. So how do we get here? And I think, again, thanks to those of you who've been part of this, but in end of 2013, and then a meeting in 2014, we created the Council for the Model Aquatic Health Code. This is kind of essentially the equivalent of the Conference for Food Protection that essentially services the National Food Code for the Food and Drug Administration. So we kind of created it with that same model in mind with some changes. But that's kind of, it's really the right hand, the right arm of CDC to really go out, continue to work with this national consortium of aquatics and public health to get ideas about how to improve and how to build on the structure that we already have. There's clearly, we look for input there, both through standing committees, ad hoc committees, and for individuals, we get change requests in. Those are then reviewed from a technical standpoint and discussed by kind of online comments from members. It's supported by 7 technical support committees. And then we have the triennial conference, which is actually going to occur in October of 2020, where we can discuss those change requests. Now that we've, after the last cycle, we'll be able to modify them in certain ways during the conference. And then it's open up for membership voting. That then goes to the board of directors to essentially go through, send that to CDC, and then CDC makes those changes. The 2017 CMAHC Conference, that was in October of last year. We had over 100 people in person, 179 change requests submitted. I know people keep asking, will the number of change requests go down? I hope over time we'll see fewer change requests, and the ones that we do get are more committee-based and substantive, where there's been a lot of discussion put behind them. Of those 179 change requests that were reviewed by the technical committee with assistance by the 7 technical support committees, 68% of those CRs were passed and sent to CDC. Recommendations sent to CDC, we discussed them, edited the MAHC as necessary, and you'll see on the MAHC website there's a track changes version as well as a clean version, so you can see what was changed and look at that. So what changed? Let's talk a little bit about this. From a general layout standpoint, the code, I mean, we made it really large font, lots of space. We've heard about it's intimidating just from people looking at the length of it. And so we did go back to a more standard format. It's 183 pages down from 289. I don't know that you'll really notice it when you see it, but we just had much more space. But I think it did, people have found that passing it to people that haven't seen the MAHC think that this is too long. And I think we can discuss that at the end as people are thinking about that. But I do think if you want to address some of the really cutting edge issues for aquatics today, you have to do that in a way that's going to be complete, and it ends up being a longer code because of that model code. Annex is down to 256 pages from 371, despite some additions that we've put in there. All references are cited by number and chapter, basically the section 8, so that we took the footnotes were on every page. That took up a lot of space. We've moved them all to the back so that you can get through the code faster. And then we've added section 3.3, thanks to Paul Siss and others for contributing here. Basically, it's updated to include full references, names, and years of all the reference code standards and laws, which was one of the comments that came in that we should be changing that as we go forward. So I think that's a really useful change now for you to pull those out. So if we start looking at what some of the changes were, and I've just kind of cherry-picked some of the bigger things that are here, is that we now have very distinct guidance for how one decontaminates following a Legionella contamination. So basically this is about remediation, testing, what does one do after one's cleaned up, and trying to get some help so that we can make sure that we eliminate Legionella from that particular, usually spa. These were CDC guidance that were in place. They were tweaked a little bit to fit with the MAHC and then implemented. So I think that's helpful for people to know what's going on, and it's an adjunct to the fecal accident response protocol that's part of the MAHC. I think one of the big issues that came up since the last edition of the MAHC was the proliferation of float tanks across the United States. Multiple jurisdictions contacted us to ask, are we going to have guidance in there? And an ad hoc committee was created to develop the guidance for that. And thanks to Washington State for some of the materials they'd already developed. But this is really, it's a little bit different than some of the other areas within the MAHC in that it is written, it's in the 412 section, but it's written essentially as a standalone because people may want to pull this out and use it differently. And so it has everything in it: plan submittal, materials, equipment standards, electrical systems and components, circulation system, disinfection and ventilation and so on are all in there. And so I think that's an important point to make here, is that we want to make sure that for this you're able to really use it however you want to do it, either as part of the MAHC or as something that you take and you put it into other regulation that you want to develop. Includes operating permits, all electrical, plumbing, disinfection, and that, because these are essentially standalone businesses basically that have these float tanks. It also talks to the operations, so cleaning and fecal vomit blood contamination response and that, which I think is going to be critical for how we operate these long term, and it gives you baseline guidance. So there's a section in Chapter 4 on design and construction, but also the operational items. How does one do this? And this is using oxidation such as ozone or UV, essentially doing multiple turnovers in between bathers. Most of the time it's single users and that. So I think it's a good thing to check out and see if this is something that your state is in need of, as we see these really the use increasing across the United States. The other is that came out of some group work as well, is thinking about disinfectant feeder sizing. And I think data that was shown to us and to the group really kind of made us think that essentially the feed sizing was oversizing based on the amount of chlorine that we said would be put into the pool. And so basically we moved to a performance criteria here, that feeders would be designed to maintain the minimal free chlorine concentrations specified in the MAHC. And some of the guidance there is really to think about how does one do this, because it makes it a little bit more challenging for an inspection standpoint and a plan standpoint, because you don't have a value that you must deliver this much product into the pool. So we're really looking at some of the chlorine demand factors, such as aquatic venue, the surface area, volume, use in space, what kind of, is it agitated water, flat water, and so on. Is it a spa, indoor versus outdoor, anticipated maximum number of bathers per day, and whether stabilizer is going to be used. And so I think that will kind of equilibrate things across the gamut. But again, it is going to be, it's performance-based, which means if you can't meet the performance standards, then you're going to have to redesign it, or you're going to have to add additional capacity on the pool. And so I think there is an incentive, obviously, to size this appropriately. Another issue came up that was a lot of discussion and actually ended up some rewriting of the wording that was initially proposed to include things, kind of a broader criteria. But essentially what was voted in is a need for particular pool chemicals, stabilizers, pool grade salt, clarifiers, flocculants, and so on, to meet some sort of standards, so that we know that they've been tested, that it is the appropriate chemical, we're not picking up certain contaminants in that. And so the way the wording was reworded from the initial wording was basically that these chemicals must meet NSF standard 50 or 60. Many of these chemicals already have 60, so that was added in, or they have EPA FIFRA registration, so they're registered as a pesticide. So if you have any of those, that's going to be fine, and that can carry over. But we did want to see that we make sure that when somebody's putting something in a pool, that it does have some registration. Calcium hardness, again, not necessarily a big public health issue, but for flexibility, the level for calcium hardness was raised to 2,500 ppm. Again, not saying that people should maintain it at that. We know what some of the issues are from deposition and so on, and vice versa, but it's giving people flexibility depending where they are in the country and what their water quality is. And then some flexibility on secondary disinfection performance, reducing that to a minimum 2 log reduction for all venues, except for the interactive water play aquatic venues, because of just some calculations and modeling that were done to show that that would be adequate to accomplish what was necessary. From a lifeguard and bather supervision standpoint, other changes is that if you're in a facility which is in a venue, basically, that is serving alcohol, you will be required to have a lifeguard. And I think some of the controversy around this in the previous conference was it wasn't necessarily going to be in the venue itself. So if you had a hotel that served alcohol, that would be an issue. It's more if it's in the swim venue itself. We know that drowning is very often associated with alcohol use, and we think this is really improve safety for people. Basically, we're really now looking at lifeguards now must have personal protective equipment on person or with their rescue tube, that it's not going to a central location. They really need to have it within close, that they can get to it very quickly. And then I think we've started thinking about, and there clearly is more discussion and more work to be done, but really clarifying glare assessment for lifeguarding positions. And as you can see here, basically looking during the day, different times of day, different seasons, to really see what the issues are with glare. As you know, as you can see in some of the picture here, part of that pool you can't see below the surface. And so how are we going to really think about that from a design and operational standpoint as far as moving guards around and making sure that we can see appropriately? From a risk management safety side, a new module was added this time. For those of you who heard, I guess in 2014, I guess, when we did the first conference, there was a really excellent presentation on the magnitude of noise pollution within natatoriums, and these levels of noise can get well above OSHA limits and everything. And so what we had an ad hoc committee formed, they added acoustic criteria to natatorium design to reduce noise levels. So basically setting some kind of levels not to exceed in that. And there are clearly materials and the science behind how to do this in other building types. It really did make sense to move that into the aquatic side of things. For those of you who had been at an indoor swim meet lately, it is deafening, and we'd like it to actually not be that way. So it uses established design criteria. These materials and everything are already used in other building types, and requires sound absorbing materials to be used to keep the absorption coefficient to a specific level. And again, this is section 4, which means most of that is about new construction and substantial renovation. But I think long term, this will reduce the noise pollution that's occurring, which will certainly be better for the users of the facility, but particularly for the staffing, because they're being exposed for much longer periods of time. And as we know, some of this noise pollution of those levels causes permanent hearing damage. Chemical release issues, I think, came to the forefront. We know that there was a big situation in Contra Costa County in California. And so, again, this is one of those issues where essentially the recirculation pump is going off. We continue running the chemical feed pumps so that you're mixing bleach with acid, releasing a chlorine gas plume, and then when we turn the recirc pump back on, we're gassing the people in the pool. And so we had much of what was needed in the MAHC, but I think this particular situation where there were issues outside of what's in the MAHC, actually, because they were doing what the MAHC, most of what the MAHC was saying, but we essentially cinch things up and add a new wording in various sections of 4 and 5 to do that. So as we look at this, it's improving some of the wording about chemical control, feed system interlocks, no or low flow deactivation, because this can be both a no flow versus a low flow situation as things shut off. Requirements are there to ensure chemical control and feed systems shut off when the research system shuts down, because it didn't in this case in Contra County for a variety of reasons. There's now challenge testing of the system is required because you need to know that it's working regularly and something hasn't broken in between. Mandatory bather evacuation when the system is shut down. And I think that's clearly one of the key issues, is that if the recirc pump is off, people shouldn't be in the pool. If you find that it's off and you're going to turn it on, people shouldn't be in the pool in case something's happened. So we really need to get people out of the pool. And in fact, in this instance, it's bather, as operators working on this, the bathers cannot re-enter until 5 minutes after the system has been turned back down, has been turned on. And so we want to make sure that you don't see that green gas plume come out of there, and we've let people back in. And then also there will now be required, and again this is section 4, so a visual alarm required if the feeder is disabled through the electrical interlock for new and replacement installations, because we know that people can bypass the best of systems that we put in place. So I think these events which we at CDC and first responders see happening across the country every summer, we really think that we're just getting better and better at trying to eliminate these over time. These are absolutely preventable if we design things appropriately. From a risk management standpoint, also new, UL has a new standard for pool lifts, so that's now been incorporated. We had some issues thinking about handholds with lazy rivers, so that now that's been clarified. If somebody's moving through a lazy river, you don't want them to be grabbing the handhold and getting their hands stuck in there, and so basically if they're required to be in the tube. So I think we've clarified that and made it more flexible depending on usage. And then there's wording in there also that makes the closure and reopenings more flexible depending on what kind of barriers and enclosures you have around the venue or facility and so on. So I think that increases the flexibility for operators. So what are we going to do next steps? And I think, where are we in the MAHC? And I think I walk this edge all the time, which I think public health people understand how long it takes to adopt something. The food code took many years to do that. Other people may not realize how long it takes to move through the whole process of looking through, basically checking it with your code, public meetings, and all that sort of thing. So where are we after the release of 2014? Essentially, we have 4 full adoptions, 4 partial adoptions by 4 states, 1 Canadian province, and 3 U.S. government agencies. We have about 18 other states or jurisdictions are in the process, and it's a multi-year process. And so I think that we're moving along. What we see in the background of that, I think, is even more important, which is who's using it. And we see this being used across the country. The annex, as I mentioned, is being used extensively, but also we see that various corporations or nonprofits are moving to be MAHC compliant. Several lifeguarding groups and other nonprofits, and it basically industry also picking up and making their guidance compliance. It's being heavily used we haven't adopted the MAHC in our state, but we're giving liberal waivers to designers if it comes from the MAHC and so on. So I think we're in a good situation. If you compare this with a kind of food code situation, this is the same thing that they've seen, and now we know that food code has essentially disseminated across the entire island. And so I think I just heard from one jurisdiction that their public meeting that the Board of Health just passed that, and so I think we're in good shape, and I think that we're getting good feedback. And one of our goals is to really move forward and really make sure that people know more and more about the MAHC and why it might be useful for them to consider in their process. Ongoing CDC work, we're posting the MAHC checklists for routine use. We've got a new concept that Joe Lako's spearheading, thinking about mini-MAHCs. As you heard me say, people get intimidated by the length of the MAHC. I will say I think it covers the issues of today, and that's why it's longer. We can't have really short codes anymore if you're going to try and address some of the issues. Otherwise, you leave it up to discretion whether they address those emerging issues like outbreaks and pool chemical injuries and so on. But these will be these mini-MAHCs will be summaries of code language to address specific problems. So in clearance right now, so it should be out shortly, cryptosporidium reduction. So there's a 1 to 2 page overview of why you want to do this, and then here's the code language that is scattered through section 4, 5, 6 that you need to put in place if you really want to fix this problem. Meaning secondary disinfection and so on. Hygiene, diaper changing is another one. We know we need to change usage of aquatics across the country to improve hygiene with our bathers, and so that's in process. And then we'll have one that pulls out all the specific criteria around these chemical gassing exposure events that are occurring, and then we'll just keep adding after this. And so we hope that'll be helpful for jurisdictions that are looking, I think I'm up to date on most things, but I don't have this covered. And so if you have ideas, type them in now or send them to us. There's a MAHC Aquatic Inspector iPad app that's going to become, that's actually already out and is on the MAHC website. And the MAHC Inspector training that was created in collaboration with the National Environmental Health Association is coming soon. It really is at the very, very end before we're able to post that. So thanks to folks for the reviewers and others that have seen that. Ongoing CMAHC work, committees in place, chlorine stabilizers, as you may or may not have heard the presentation last year, have made great progress. We think we have a model for how to use stabilizers appropriately in settings that is really science and very chemistry based, which is great. It's not kind of just ad hoc and kind of out of the air, which we saw some of the usage really being thought of did not have a lot of science behind it. They're in the process of writing that up to be published because, as you know, the MAHC needs to have published peer-reviewed data to update, and so we're hoping that we'll have a change request, this published and a change request in for the next conference for people to think about that. And it really is about using stabilizer in a ratio with the free chlorine, so that's done, and it makes very good chemical sense. Indoor aquatic facility ventilation design and air quality is in place now and working. And so we're looking forward to what comes out of that. There's a lot of work to be done. And then splash pad redesign and shell design, we're kind of in the process of starting to think about that and bring it online too. But trying to do it so we don't overwhelm everyone. But I think there are a lot of issues that have come up in previous conferences. We need to sit down and talk for a longer period of time about how we might address some of those. From a standing committee standpoint, we're in place. Paul Sisson has been leading annex revision, and some of you on the call, I see Joe Stefaniak on here, that are helping with that. So we've gone through the annex thinking about what's missing and where could we use help. But we want to have this as regularly being updated by experts and referenced appropriately and then incorporating that. So that's moving forward. And then we now have just created a CMAHC APSP code consistency, so we make sure that our codes are consistent and don't cause consternation with differences between them when designers are doing things and constructing. So, as I wrap this up, and hopefully we have lots of questions for this, and sorry, I haven't been able to actually track them all as they're coming in as I'm talking, but I think the process that we've got in place, which is a continuation of the way the MAHC was created, involves a lot of people, gets lots of input, blends public health with the aquatic sector and academics, and so we want that to continue with the CMAHC, both from a CMAHC standpoint and from a CDC standpoint. We rely on the CMAHC to really gather this national input and feed it back to us for consideration. So please join the CMAHC, be part of the ongoing work to improve aquatics. That's how we make this a better product. Change requests for the 2020 conference, I say now accepted, but it should be shortly. It isn't quite live. We weren't quite ready when the last Wednesday when it was going live, and so I said, let's just hold this. I don't think people will miss it too much, but we'll be able to submit them now. There is on the CMAHC website, there's a new timeline. We will be giving more time to do the work that's necessary, so we'll start basically after Labor Day the year before the conference, so there's more time for submission, for you to discuss change requests at your national meetings in October, and then finalize those so we can get the technical review committee and support committees reviewing very early in the year so that we can have more discussion, more comments, and not jam people into the very end on on how to do this. So I think that was the reason for going to a 3-year cycle, that it'll give us more time for committee work and for thoughtful consideration of change requests. Start thinking about with your professional groups, we talk about it this fall. What do we need to be thinking about? That we've got time now to really do this. And so I think that's really a great part of doing this. So get involved, be part of this process. I think we've shown that it works. It can be done on a regular basis. There are substantive improvements as we move forward. So please be thinking about that. And then finally, we've got resources. Model Aquatic Health Code site itself at CDC has just been updated for the launch. And you'll see also the CMAHC was updated, site was updated, meaning all the 2017 material has been archived. The search function on the CMAHC website has the 3rd edition in it, so you can use that as well as earlier editions. And everything is updated there. We will in the next month for sure have change requests form and comment form up, so we can start doing that, because we have a list of things that have shown up as well that we want to do. And so with that, I'll acknowledge all the people at CDC that were involved in this. Thank you so much for that, and CMAHC acknowledgements as well. And many of the names I see here today, so thank you from a CMAHC standpoint from doing all of that. And just a contact number, this is kind of a generic one that Lena Curtis picks this up on a regular basis and feeds them out to who will take care of these sorts of things. I know Doug has also been serving as a resource as Executive Director of the CMAHC. And with that, thank you so much, and I guess we can start addressing questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Beach, for taking the time today to talk about these updates and what's coming down the road. So as you'll all see, I did also just add a poll to your webinar screen that you should be able to see. And the question that we are asking is, if you are considering adopting the MAHC in part or in whole, so only if you're considering adopting the MAHC in part or in whole, please type your jurisdiction name in the box below. It's great for us to get a sense of who all is thinking about it and who's not. So along those lines, Dr. Beach, one of our first questions from the audience was about if you know whether any counties in Missouri are considering adoption of the MAHC.
There are some, and I can't off the top of my head remember the name, which ones, but Joe, you might know. Did you?
Hey, this is Jason here, and can you hear me, Grace? Just the first time I've spoken.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, yeah, and I can't quite recall off the top of my head. It's been a number of years. So just in general terms, in the past, I've had some conversations with some counties around St. Louis and also the Branson, resort area. That's generally where the interest and conversations have been around aquatic codes within the state of Missouri, but nothing real definitive to report, as of recently.
Okay, thanks, Jason. So another question from the audience. We seem to get this one a fair amount. Will an Android app be considered for the Inspector app?
That's a great question. We don't have it in the works at this time, but I think that's going to be based upon the use of the current app as well and feedback associated, from that app. But no, I understand. We're just supporting Apple at this time. Yeah. And that was funded out of some R&D money, by the way, here at CDC, and that was the platform that we were able to work with the contractor that we were working with at that time. So we're hoping that we get good use out of this MAHC app, and maybe that we're able to expand.
Yeah, I see the next question about an issue with patron breastfeeding in the pool, and that this is a very tough issue, and it's come up multiple times from a swimming standpoint. We actually have wording on the Healthy Swimming website about this, and that we've worked with our breastfeeding folks here at CDC, and that we actually discourage people from doing this, and I think for two reasons. One is, first of all, there's potential for pathogens to be in the water, and you really don't want your child basically drinking that as well, and potentially transmitting whatever might be in there. And so we really discourage it from that standpoint. We support breastfeeding fully, but in the pool, again, you're within a potentially contaminated substrate. The other is that young infants really have very poor temperature control, and so an infant can actually get cold in a very short period of time being held in a pool. A pool is not body temperature, and so you're really challenging the child's temperature control because it's not entirely formulated when they're an infant, and so we really discourage it. But if you look under, look on the Healthy Water Healthy Swimming website, you'll be able to find it there. There's wording under specific issues. If not, just email that contact thing and we'll point you to the link. I don't have it up in front of me here, but I think that's reasonable wording, that it's not that we're saying don't do this for any other reason, that it's probably not good for your child to be doing this. And so hopefully that answers your question.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Beach. We have another question that came in about splash pad redesign, and if that's taking place in the new review or in the 4th edition?
Yeah, that's one of the ad hoc committees that we're going to be forming soon, so it'll be for the next edition, not this one. Because we think there are clearly issues revolving around, how much water you're spraying versus how much is going through a treatment train, and other issues that have come up that we want to try and think about how we deal with those sorts of issues in the future. So stay tuned for that.
Great. We had another question about disinfection for float tanks. Is chlorine required along with UV and/or ozone?
Yeah, it's a interesting issue here, and so this is an exception to what we usually have for everything else in the MAHC, and that chlorine is not required here. We've done kind of a risk assessment on what's there. First of all, it's essentially a saturated magnesium sulfate solution. Very hard to figure out how one would use halogen to disinfect there, and so we've opted not to have halogen disinfection, but there is a requirement for oxidation, meaning either a UV system or ozone, where essentially when the person gets out, as they're preparing for the next, they're going to have to go through multiple turnovers to treat the water in between. I think most of the issues that we think arise in a setting such as a float tank are going to be more bacterial, contact related, and that versus ingestion. And so we think that is a reasonable compromise here because of the high salt solution in that. Doug, did you want to add anything more on that?
No, you pretty much covered it, Michael. And we looked at it, and there's a lot of discussion in the annex that gives the explanation and the rationale on that. So I'd encourage you to read the annex information on that.
Okay. Yeah. There's a very good explanation. There are some good citations in there where folks in Canada did some risk assessments and that sort of thing, which are very useful to read. I see another one about maximum ambient temperatures in natatorium, and I think it's one of those issues where we've struggled over the years because people ask us about the requirement for, and unfortunately it comes down to usage. And so are you using it for an arthritis class or a competitive swim class, and the temperature really needs to be changed depending on that. And so we do have some guidance based on usage but I don't think it's been put into, I don't think it's in the annex. We say, if you email the MAHC site, we can send that to you. I guess the question is, it's not necessarily science-based versus usage. Does it belong in the annex? Maybe that's a useful thing for the future, just to guide people for why we don't have it in there. At least, Doug, I don't remember it being in the annex. It's a separate.
I can't remember if we discussed it. But I know the ventilation air quality folks and their deliberations may be looking at temperature, but not as a comfort, but as it relates to evaporation rate.
Right, evaporation, humidity, and all those sorts of things. There'll be guidance on that. But I'll write that down, and we can certainly discuss that, because I know that comes up, and people think that there's, that it should be a specific temperature, and it does make it difficult when you have a variety of different groups coming in. But yeah, email that MAHC site, and we can send you at least some of the guidance that's out there from other groups. Okay.
Excellent. We have someone who is interested in getting more involved in the MAHC network and is asking, how would someone put their name forward for consideration on some part of the committees listed, like the spray pad redevelopment?
Yeah, it's a good question. If you're interested in committee work, we're kind of going through and making sure that we have a broad range of expertise and so on when we form these. But if you're interested in being on groups, there is an application on the CMAHC website under tools and hang on, what's it called? I think it's underneath tools and forms. I mean, there's a standing committee membership application, but I think, putting something on there or talking to Doug or emailing Doug would be helpful. I see. Tom, will you be posting the adoption mat you showed? Good question, Tom. We're just considering how to do that, which is why we wanted to have this this poll done. And so, thank you, Grace, for putting that up. Since I sped through, I even had a note here saying cue the survey, but forgot. We want to make sure that it's database, meaning we've actually heard from people. So for those of you that we haven't been talking to that are new on this, please email us if you can, just so we have a contact to the MAHC@cdc.gov. We'd like to offer whatever assistance we can. And see if if you don't need anything, that's fine. If you do, we can help do that. We can put in comments. We can try and get people to public meetings, both from an aquatic standpoint and a public health standpoint, as you need. So please drop us a note, and that would be great as we move forward. But our plan is to put something like this up on the web. We're just in the process of thinking about how to do that.
Awesome. Sounds great. We have a question about cyclospora.
Yes.
If there are going to be any guidelines for eliminating that from the water.
Good question about cyclospora in pool water. We do, one of the issues that actually saves us for cyclospora is that it is not immediately infectious when it comes out in someone's stool. There is a incubation period and other kind of environmental factors that need to occur before it is actually infectious. Unlike Cryptosporidium or Giardia, they're immediately infectious. You put it in the pool and, anything you swallow can infect you. And so at this point in time, we don't have good data on inactivation. We would suspect, since it's a similar organism to Cryptosporidium, that the UV would be appropriate if you have that in, but we don't know for sure. It's a very difficult organism to study because it can't be grown in quantities where you can actually do a lot of these studies. And so I don't think it's going to be in the foreseeable future that we will have good guidance because there's no way to gather the data to test it. But I think, if we get to that point, we will work towards that. Hopefully that, sorry, it's a non-answer, but it's a really tough organism. But I do think it not being infectious immediately is really the key for us from a protective standpoint.
The next question is asking if a proper swimming attire has been included or considered for inclusion in the MAHC.
Eugene, I think I'm writing it down. I'm going to try and see if you're going to push that. So Again, I think we have to talk about what that means and yeah, how do we think about that? But it's a good thing to bring up. It is not in there at the current time.
Great. And the next question, what if any, is the MAHC position on service animals and pools? I get asked that a lot.
Yeah, good. That's a great question. Thanks, Pam. It's always a tough one. I mean, I think from a CDC standpoint, I think we have some guidance up on the website. We're, you know, from a risk assessment standpoint, from an infectious standpoint, it's probably lower risk. Many of these pathogens are not transmittable to humans. What we've seen is it's mostly an injury risk. We don't encourage this. If people are going to do it, which seems to be overwhelming that people want to do it at the end of the season and then close down and clean your pool afterwards. But we're not encouraging it as part of operation. We would discourage it, actually. Does that answer your question, Pam?
I haven't heard back from Pam yet. She says yes.
Okay, yes. Okay, good. I see the next question about electrical integrity and grounding and so on. There were some modifications to the wording on the grounding in that this time. I think part of it was first of all, that you're checking on a regular basis to see that it's still intact, but also if there's construction or anything else going on, that it needs to be checked so that you don't actually remove it. And Doug, do you remember the other specifics? That's in the new 3rd edition that the wording was changed or basically improved.
I'm sorry, what was that?
It's basically about, you know, what about the electrical integrity? It's about the grounding, and we did change some of the wording. That was incorporated this time.
Yeah, it was just
the bonding.
I'd have to look into. I'm not tuned into what the specific issue is here right now. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
I had some additional answers on the service animal. I was trying to get that up, but.
Gotcha. So basically look for bonding and that sort of thing. Some of the wording did change regarding that.
We have a comment from Kevin that says, thanks for answering the questions, and he'll be sure to email those contacts provided. Yeah, no,
that would be great. Anybody who's answered this survey too, if you could just let us know, give us a contact. We like to help people. I mean, I think what people do that have been involved, but we did this because we were asked to do this by both aquatics and by jurisdictions. We think that this is a useful document. We think that it covers many of the emerging issues that have come up, so that, you know, we can't do aquatics the same way that we did it 30 years ago. Really, things have changed. And so we think this national consortia kind of being operated by the CMAHC is a good way to go. We're fine-tuning the process as that goes, but every process gets that. But I do think this will maximize input, and I think the more that now that we have 3 years, we'll have more time to talk about specifics and really think about how can we engage everybody to think about how we improve some of these issues. It's been more difficult with a very short time frame. I think this is going to give us the opportunity to move forward and really get things done. Thanks. No other questions. We still have a couple of minutes. Any other burning questions? I realize there are a few, and I take full responsibility where a number didn't get updated the way it should, and so we will have an errata document that will go up. There's a link that somebody changed within the week before we posted that's now broken, and so, you know, we'll work to get those things up. So just be clear, there'll be an errata for small changes that we noticed. Doug noticed another one today, but we'll put those up on the website so that you've got those as well. They're all as part of the editing process. We'll do that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Beach. We are wrapping up a couple minutes early. But I just want to thank CDC for sparing you for a few minutes to talk with folks about all the changes that are going on. And thank you for making yourself available for questions. Again, everyone, this webinar has been recorded and it will be distributed to you all. And it will also be available on the NACCHO MAC Network webpage along with all our archived webinars. So thanks again to our speakers. And if there are no final comments, have a great day, everyone.
Thanks. I just was going to comment, again, we're here to assist both from the CDC standpoint, the CMAHC standpoint. Contact us. We really do want to help make this as easy as possible for you to use. Thank you so much. And Grace, could you send a listing of the survey?
Absolutely, can do.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Have a fantastic afternoon.
Thanks so much.